Hi guys, welcome. Quick introduction, my name is Loïc Le Gaillard. I'm the co-founder of Carpenters Workshop Gallery, also co-founder of Ladbroke Hall. So it's a great pleasure to have you tonight. It's going to be the beginning of some talks, a discussion that we're going to hold at Ladbroke Hall, mainly around the theme of design, which is one of our sort of core expertise, as some of you know. I don't know, how many of you have been to Ladbroke Hall before? Okay, so a fair amount, not that many. So let me tell you a little bit more about Ladbroke Hall, because I guess if you're here, you probably have an appetite for design, collectible design, but Ladbroke Hall, I think, is worth explaining. What was the idea? I'd like to use the word vision behind the projects. Of course, we're here to celebrate the great designers and keep the program of that we started, Julien Lombray and myself, 20 years ago. But it was important for us to try to stretch the way we work as a gallerist, and we wanted to have a space whereby we could celebrate any other form of artistic expression beyond design. So music, live music, poetry, contemporary dance, talks is very much part of what's happening at Ladbroke Hall. And probably 2 to 3 times a week we have some live events. We're now getting very famous for our Friday Jazz events every Friday. And we do some pop concert as well. We have a beautiful series called The Sound, where we invite some emerging talent to come and perform. So it's about an immersive place where any form of art and beauty is celebrated. So that's for Ladbroke Hall. So just a few words. Well, I'm sure you've seen, I hope you've seen some of the works in the gallery downstairs. It's mainly to celebrate the very long career of Paul and the launch of his book, which is, by the way, available on the table, and Paul will be signing some copies for those who want at the end of the show. Paul is a man who makes furniture float, glass bend, and gravity cry, if I could find 3 words. With him tonight, on the right corner, Tom, who's I would consider as the design's a world rock star who welded his way successfully into the spotlight. He made copper cool again, and it's a great pleasure to have him tonight. We'll be talking about creativity, material madness, the London design scene, most likely about AI. So they represent both 2 different powerful approach, but different. And I thought it was interesting to get their views on the London scene, the design London scene, about contemporary design, about collectible design, because very often, and especially, both of them do have an industrial practice and I would say, more gallery design limited practice. So it's going to be interesting. And to tame the 2 wild boys, we have one of the legends of design. I'm sure you know Henrietta Thompson. She's been writing about design. She's one of the most knowledgeable person we know in the design field. She is the editor-at-large for Wallpaper, and she does many things, and we have a great respect for what she does, being one of the big voice of contemporary design. That's it for me. Please check the Ladbroke Hall website, see what we do, because it's a phenomenal place for culture and way beyond what we do on the gallery side. And for those who haven't tried Polini, it's a beautiful restaurant, and we've been voted best Italian restaurant in the UK, for those who didn't know. Anyway, enjoy. Thank you very much, guys. Cool. Behave, thanks. Especially you. Good luck.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. And welcome. It's so lovely to see you all here this evening in this incredible space. Thank you to Carpenters Workshop and to Ladbroke Hall for hosting us. It really is such a remarkable space, I'm sure you all know, and it's wonderful to be here this evening for what promises really to be a very wide-ranging and rich discussion. And I'm sure we're not going to run out of things to talk about. I think we may have the opposite problem. Just to clarify, I thought I might just mention I had a voice note from a friend this morning, a non-design industry friend who signed off with, "Oh, and good luck with the archaeology talk." It took a beat. This is not an archaeology talk, so if you are here for Roman relics and ruins, you're in the wrong room, but hopefully that's not too disappointing. What we're really doing tonight, well, we will be doing some digging. We will be peeling back the layers of this wonderful city, digging into how London continues to inspire, challenge and shape two of our most celebrated designers, Tom Dixon and Paul Cocksedge, but also how two of our most celebrated designers, Tom Dixon and Paul Cocksedge, are continuing to inspire, shape and challenge the city itself. It's really wonderful to be sitting with the two of you, having known you both for so long and worked with you in various different capacities and have various adventures all around the world, to talk about the role London has played in your lives and work, and really from formative years to global recognition, from East London studios and West London hubs through to the international stage. So without further ado, let's excavate. I would like to just start by asking both of you to just give a little rundown of your life in London, the different places that you've lived, worked, studied, and in a really sort of potted history, small paragraph of how London has shaped you where you are today within the city.
Okay, I arrived in London from Huddersfield when I was 5. I was born in Tunisia, lived in Morocco and Egypt, and then landed in Huddersfield, had a Yorkshire accent for a year, and then I became a Londoner. So I came to Blackheath, but since the age of 7, I've been more the Royal Borough. I went to school at Holland Park Comprehensive, so I've literally moved 1 mile from my school. So just up Ladbroke Grove to Holland Park and then back again. Had a studio next door. I'm your local designer, by the way, right? So London, how's it shaped me? I think I wouldn't have ever become a designer if I hadn't been in London. I think, I grew up in a London that was very much ruled by music. Youth was not so interested in design, it was interested in being in bands, so that's what I did. I was a musician for a couple of years, playing bass guitar in a disco band. Had an accident, broke my arm. The bass player that replaced me played for Madonna and for Michael Jackson, so that could have been me. And now, but music business allows you a lot of time to, during the day, it's a nocturnal activity to do things, and I had motorbikes and cars, and I learnt to weld, and welding very quickly became a kind of superpower for me. I think that really having been in that music, it was a very tribal landscape, London at the time, with, there was still heavy rock, and there was goth, and there was new wave, and there was punk, and I think the punks liberated a whole generation of people to know that they didn't have to be very good to express themselves, right? So we were in a position where I didn't feel I needed a certificate to do design or to make things. I just got on with it, just like I did in the music business. Taught myself my own instrument, but taught myself how to weld, and then started making things. And I think the pictures behind me are really about the London that existed in the early 80s, were full of debris of industry, of flat, houses were being converted into flats, so there was fireplaces and skips, and there's a lot of free material. So a lot of the things that I'm showing here, which date from that period, are really made from rubbish, and turning rubbish into a living. So like alchemy, is sort of what I do even now. Paul?
Cool. Sounds good. I think, firstly, thank you for coming here this evening, and it's quite a special occasion because my parents are in the top row there, and they're both Londoners. My dad was born here, and so almost 80 years now they've seen London change in ways which they could never have imagined, so it's quite poignant to be talking about that today. And I think I've got to begin with my childhood. Quite a working class, down-to-earth beginning in a place called Turnpike Lane near Tottenham, very multicultural, multi-faith, a brilliant way to start, and that upbringing is still in me, the way I create. But in a way similar to what you said, I was a little bit of an outsider, so when I was applying to the Royal College, I couldn't impress with my knowledge of art or design history, so I had to sort of be a little bit cheeky, and in the back of my portfolio, I had this envelope, which I said, why choose me? I wrote it. And because my dad's in the printing game, I counterfeit loads of cash. So a stack of money, but looked like real money. And Ron Arad, I'm sure that name must ring a bell for everyone who loves design. He was the teacher at that point. And so in my interview, we didn't talk about the work. He was like, how do you counterfeit money? And that was a really kind of interesting, but it showed in a way where I came from, because I had to, when you haven't got a lot, you've got to invent, right? And so some of the early projects were about going to the college canteen, taking a polystyrene cup after I've drank some tea, heating it in an oven, transforming it into these sculptural lamps, or finding old records in second-hand shops, heating, making pieces of design. And it's that kind of vibe still stays within the studio.
And that, so really using the fabric of the city and the materials that are here to, to inform your creative work. And I mean, I don't know if it's still like that today for the next generation. We can circle back to that later. But did you feel like the London scene at that time supported your work? Did you feel like it was, being here was beneficial to your career? But you first.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, London, maintains a kind of a critical mass in the world in terms of all kinds of different trades. And the interesting thing about London, I think, is it's never the best at anything, but it's always second or third best at everything, right? So it's got this breadth, which was there at the time. Not all of it. Some of it arrived during that period, like art. Being a centre for contemporary art, but definitely finance was here, crime was here. There was theatre. Theatre, we might be number one. But there's significant fashion, business, software. I could go on. So what's unique about London then and now is the immense breadth of overlaps, which is unique, I think, probably in the world. I mean, sure, New York's got a lot of amazing things, but it's not got the breadth that London has got. The car design happens on the other side, as does the tech, right? So I think that really allowed many international visitors to come. And weirdly, most of my customers then, and possibly even now, were not British, right? So the English never particularly liked design, I noticed, but there was a lot of people in finance from Italy. There was a lot of Japanese visitors coming from the street culture. There's a lot of Germans really interested in what was going on in London, and then, the Eurostar opened, and that opened up a whole other thing. And so it's a city in constant evolution, but the basic premise, which is it's big enough, it's too big to fail, it doesn't have any equivalent in Europe, is still the same, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think looking back to my education at the Royal College, creatively, it was dinging every single bell. Ron created this platform which allowed all his students to sort of follow ideas, and it was an amazing, any idea you thought of, you could go in that direction. He was fine with it. But the one thing it didn't do was teach us anything to do about the business of design or running a studio. And I suppose I didn't really know how lucky I was, but I met Joanna Pinho, my business partner, who's here in the audience today. There she is over there. And, without her, it wouldn't happen, anything that we've done, because our complementary skills, and I know, Tom, you have a business side to what you do, but this ability to maintain creative is so refreshing. So we left college and we sort of started from the bottom up. We had no family contacts. We were hustling. And it was really exciting because that's where London really performed for us, and the things that Tom was mentioning, all those different energies within the city. And we tried our best. We were working group shows, we were knocking on doors, we were, maximizing the kind of the more traditional press. Everything's changed now with social media, but we were getting publicity, and then finally things unfolded. But it was a great place to be in those early days.
Able to sort of ride that wave of creative energy that city really perhaps still has. But I'd like to talk a little bit about London's kind of creative booms that it's so famous for, and your respective roles in that. And particularly East London, I would say your name is synonymous with Hackney and East London, whereas Tom, you're very much sort of West London and the docks rooted, but now obviously Coldrops Yard. And I don't know, you compare London to other cities, and I would say London has this, possibly more than anywhere else, that does have this sort of sense of flux, and it's always changing. And the spirit really, changes, and it moves around in different places as developers move in and gentrify, and the luxury flats move in, and the retail and the hospitality. And you've spoken, Paul, about how that change is not always positive for the creative industries, and yet at the same time, probably now you are both instrumental, you are agents of those changes, and you are the people that developers come to make the places cool. So how do you feel about your roles and those changing attitudes with the places? Perhaps starting with you, Paul, in relation to Hackney.
We everyone who came out of the Royal College, it was impossible to start a studio in West London. The prices were way too high, so we all flocked to East London, and Hackney was a real hub at that time and it was a special place because it had factories still there, metal workers, textiles, and there was a lot of art spaces. And me and Joanna, we dived straight into that scene. Hackney Wick was, did you ever go to any of the 24-hour parties there? No way. But it was incredible. The jazz scene. It was really, really exciting. And so we saw how that area sort of unlocked, and how art and design played such a big part of it. It became it's almost like being in some weird Pinocchio land where everything was like, is no one looking at us, how much fun we're having, But as you say, it's things change. People know it's a hot spot, and then prices go up, and we can talk about that later. But it was fascinating at how it was a moment in time. And when I hear you talk about that musical era that you went through, I'm kind of jealous I didn't see it, but maybe if you didn't go to some of the parties I went to, maybe you'd be jealous of what I've gone through. Oh, right, all right.
Tom, your move from the docks to just around the corner here to Coldrops Yard was really significant, and I think you were probably one of the first there in Coldrops.
Yeah, I think developers have twigged that design can create the beginnings of the things that eventually end up with gentrification. It'll be quite interesting to see whether around here manages to get the critical mass. The difficulty here is there's not a lot of other shops or warehouses that could get colonized in the same way. So you need a cluster around it. So London ebbs and flows in an extraordinary way, and I guess probably both of us haven't been much in Peckham or in Camberwell, where it's really happening right now.
Yeah.
Particularly in music. And so we always give up London for lost. I think Brexit was the big shock that everybody was like, oh my God, it's all over. Everybody's going to Frankfurt to do finance. Yeah, right. They came back, because in the end it's endlessly layered London as well. You know, you've got all of these different things, and it's many different cities now. I mean, when I was starting, it was all in the West End, right? So all the clubs, all the action, you'd go into the West End to do it, and then come back home to Ladbroke Grove, which was a bit music business, a bit gritty. But you know, it'll evolve again, and it is right now. So it's kind of interesting to see the kind of slight reflourishing. What's missing is, I think, it's affordable space to do stuff. But given that everything now has become miniaturized, so you can run a business from your phone, maybe you don't need quite as much space as we needed. But it's a shame, because it happens a lot in a two-dimensional
Vibe is very
cloud
different on your phone. I mean, we've got all these wonderful images carouselling behind us as well, so I would love to talk about some specific projects and where London has particularly informed your work, say more recently as well. So I think particularly this one here, the excavation evicted.
This one quite literally is scoops of London, and a long story short, because I can talk about this far too long, but in the simplest story was I was working away in my studio, and there's a knock at the door, and my landlord, and he was really excited and happy because he just got planning permission, and he said, it's time to knock the building down and develop these luxury apartments. And it was actually quite a shocking moment for me, because I'd spent almost 20 years in that studio, and I could pinpoint exactly where all the ideas had come from, and I needed to process it. And actually, to do it, I took a diamond drill and connected it to power and cut a hole in the ground, and the screech and the noise and the water and the electricity, and it was chaos. However, there's my boring grey floor there, but when I took the first bit out, I was thinking all these beautiful London stones that had been hiding beneath my feet. And that was the birth of the idea. So I said to Joanna, who was pregnant at the time, I said, look, take a seat, but I've got an idea. I said, look, I want to stop all work, and I want to excavate the entire studio. And she looked at me, and I was turning 40, and she must have thought, like, this must be his midlife crisis project. And in her supportive way, she said, look, I'll back you, but I'll be going home and continuing work. And that's what we did. We drilled and we excavated 2 tons of concrete, which then became a body of work, a furniture collection. One of those pieces is in the gallery here. And there was some amazing discoveries, like this layer of history of Victorian brick. So that's the rawest, closest example of that for me.
The landlord was fine with that.
My landlord, he didn't know, and it was illegal as well. And I actually make jokes of people. They go, "I love this table." I said, it's borderline illegal. The landlord, if we buy it, the landlord might want it back. But half joking, but his architects did. So when that, anyway, so it's a long story. But there's a lot of humour in it, but it wasn't funny for me at the time. It was actually a sort of a real release of a sort of an energy. But on a more sort of optimistic note, there's a work here which is called Please Be Seated, this kind of curvy sculptural wooden form. And that comes from London too, because I was in Broadgate where the developer wanted me to think of a piece of work. And I was looking at the flows of people, some people whizzing to work. So arches go up to not stop them, but the opposite arch is a cradle for the human body, and that's where the different...
That's the most amazing project. Really, it really resonates with a huge amount of people.
Yeah, and London was sort of the co-designer of that in that way.
What about, so Tom, I remember touring a brick factory near Luton, which was very much part of, some of the work that you were doing at the time with London makers. Do any companies still make things in London anymore?
Yeah, there's a few kind of leftovers, a couple of casters in Greenwich. There's, the brick factory that you're talking about makes bricks for restoration of, classic buildings. It's, we sit in London on this massive pile of mud clay, right? That's why London's built from brick, and there's a couple of brick makers still that are making bricks in a traditional way, out of the mud that's under the feet, using wood from the forests up in the north. Well, it's not exactly London, is it? But still making things. But it's a tough game, and it's really the cost of energy has become really the big problem for industry right now, and Brexit has become a big problem for industry in terms of your closest markets and how you can export simply, but people then forced into the position that Paul's describing, which is we do it yourself is the thing that happened. It happened to me. I started in a terrible recession, and then started my other business in an awful recession as well after 9/11. And in that nightmare, opportunities, kind of the cracks start to expose. You can get a cheap studio maybe, or you can get willing labour. Problem with the environment we're in now is that you don't get any of those things, right? So nobody's reducing the price of real estate, and nobody wants to work particularly either, right? So you're not getting the breaks that you used to get in London. So people are forced further out. But in a way, at one point, London had kind of sucked in all of the creativity, even from Europe, right? And so it was almost it had it too good for too long. So actually, Brexit gave it a really big shock, and maybe some of those cracks being exposed allows more creativity to come in, because in the end, London kind of dominated for so long until it stabbed itself in the stomach a few years ago, right? But well, maybe I should show a bit the kind of process. So I brought along this chair just to show you a bit. So I didn't have anything really apart from a welding set, and my studio was really the size of half of this stage. But this chair was actually inspired by a visit to the Science Museum. So London's great because it's got some fabulous museums. But this was an attempt to make the lightest chair in the world. And when you start welding, you get welding rods, and this is made from welding rods. And I'd been fascinated by the bridges, the models of bridges in the Science Museum. I thought, I'm going to make the lightest chair in the world, because I was obsessed with the Guinness Book of Records and I wanted to be in it. And so I started playing with triangulation, which is really just dividing up structures to make them stronger. And I managed it. I made the lightest metal chair in the world with a very, very thin, probably half of this thickness of welding rod. And then I was very proud of myself. And then an American client that was larger than me, was sat on it, and it did exactly this. So, it collapsed. But this is something in engineering which is called, testing to destruction. So it teaches you how to do the next one. And so you can see how that's bending. So that's the point where it's weak, and so you just add another triangle.
Nice.
So that's how I taught myself how to design, strong and light structures. Is just, practicing, failing, practicing again, which, you'll hear from a lot of people. I'm sure Paul has failed many times.
Yeah.
You read that Dyson book about him making 1,000 prototypes before he came up with it. And, you just teach yourself by practice, which is very underestimated, I think, in art schools right now. Right?
Absolutely.
It's still light, but not the lightest anymore.
It's interesting when you talked about how maybe the next generation of creatives might be working on a miniature computer thing, but maybe that wouldn't exist in that world in the same way.
I think also that, just to answer your question, does the industry exist in London? It's kind of creeping back because of the miniaturization of industrial equipment as well. So, you can design on your computer, and then, what's happening now is, particularly with robots and people are obsessed with rapid prototyping, but almost every machine now is digitally controlled and actually much smaller and more versatile than they were before. So the cost of labour, which was really the reason why we started outsourcing everything, is going to reduce anyway. And it is possible for designers to do what musicians have done over the last few years, which is to remove the big industry from the equation, right? So now you can make your album on a laptop in your bedroom, and you don't need a record company to make the vinyls that Paul makes into dishes anymore. You don't need the big recording studio and the technicians and the rest of it. It's all on your laptop, so you can go direct to the audience with your product, which is, I think, a really fascinating possibility now, which is made possible by the new technologies, right? So it's creeping back in small ways, and you know that there is the possibility, if the government wants to encourage people to be good at managing machines, apprenticeships and the rest of it in manufacturing, to actually bring industry back to London.
They will. So I mean, given that, and also, you know, the way technology has changed, where we work, how we work, the size of the space that we need, what is it that keeps you both in London? Why are you here, and how much do you look to the city to inform your work?
I mean, first off, family here, so that's obviously the biggest magnetic pull, but it's a constant flow of inspiration. I think what's interesting about London is you have, obviously, Tom's work.
You have Tom.
You have Tom, yeah, exactly.
It's good reason.
Full stop. That's done. That's why I'm in London. No, but you have Tom's work, different to mine. You expand that out. You have people like Samuel Ross, Ron Arad, Beth and Laura Wood. These are all creative people walking down the same streets, but they're inspired in different ways, and it allows us all to create our own distinctive style. I think that's what really people find interesting about London, how it doesn't have a one way of describing it. And as I say, after COVID, I looked at my computer and I thought, I don't really want to sit at a table anymore, and that object didn't make sense to me, so I spend most of my time walking, looking, photographing, drawing, and the street is just a constant inspiration, as well as, you know, the people, which is so rich in variety.
And I think, Tom, one of the things that comes through in your work so much as well is that balance between the sort of historical and heritage and respect for the city's past and history, but also the innovation and the technology. And you know, we haven't spoken about AI yet. I'm sure we will. But you know, how do you navigate that tension in a city like this within your work?
Well, to go back to your earlier question to Paul, I'm desperate to leave London. I always have been, but for some reason it kind of pulls you back, and you can't, you know, because it's pretty much got everything. It keeps on adding to it, but. Yeah, no, I think, you know, obviously I've used, you know, quite a lot of the narratives of you know, of the UK in terms of, you know, how we try and promote ourselves internationally or look different to other people. But I think there is a truth to the fact that the history and the heritage and the way we go about things, the language, the sense of humour, the getting on with stuff, the kind of, it's very hard to kind of pinpoint it, particularly if you're here and in there. And in a way, it's your job as a journalist to kind of describe it rather than mine, because, you know, I'm too involved in it. But I think there is a distinction. I like to think of it a bit more like, I don't know, cars or something, where, you know, if you were a French car, you'd be, you know, very kind of innovative and quirky. If you were Italian, you'd be a bit sporty. If you're German, you'd be purely engineering, and if you're British, you'd be a Land Rover kind of thing, you know. It's like, okay, it's a bit more brutal, a bit more basic, you know. And it's quite funny when you get interviewed by, you know, all the time people are saying, well, you know, what's the philosophy behind your work, or, you know, tell us about the emotion, you know. And I'm like, really? If you wanted emotion, you should have gone and seen the Spanish design, right? But, you know, what we're interested in is how things are made, and you know, and trying to think of different ways of doing it, and navigating this very complicated landscape to actually get something out into the world, you know. And it makes you more resilient, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about, you know, London being almost, I think it's 2,000 years old, I think whenever you show a work here, it's almost impossible not to connect to its history. And there's a picture on this projection, which is a piece of work called Coalescence, which, my time for a prop, is made from this coal. My dad and I went to the last remaining coal mine in Wales, because my dad's family were miners. and we took out a ton of coal, and we exhibited it in the painted hall. And what was interesting is the curator, she pointed at this Baroque ceiling and said, Paul, look, see over there, there's a depiction of a pot, and inside that pot was a piece of coal, because the building was partly paid by the coal tax. So that's fascinating about showing works in London, because they resonate with time and history. And I think that's one of the reasons I love the commissions that come from here. But also just one of your installations, which was for London Design Festival, where what was it entitled? The giveaway of the chair. Do you remember? I didn't get one, but it was an amazing moment because do you remember that piece that Tom did? These chairs. I mean, when I Trafalgar Square, yeah. So again, that Nelson's Column. These are beautiful buildings, and then this installation of this quite futuristic chair.
Tom, can you tell us just for the room?
Well, okay, there's always this conversation about value of design and of products and the rest of it. And I was like, this is such an old-fashioned business, isn't it? Furniture, where people buy things and they hang on to them for 2 lifetimes. And wouldn't it be nice to be a bit more like Google, like a really modern furniture company? So I thought, well, okay, how did Google give away their product, which is search? How do they do that? Well, they do it just like Formula One. They sell advertising. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make a chair, pay for it by advertising on the chair, and tell the people that if they advertise on my chair, the message can go into people's homes for 5 years. So it's a really good deal, right? And that would allow me to give away 500 chairs. So, with London Design Festival, we're able to co-opt Trafalgar Square. I was able to make 500 chairs, albeit in polystyrene, because one of the sponsors was somebody that wanted to show polystyrene as a permanent material, not just a packaging material. And I made 500 chairs, and this is slightly before viral happened. So it was on radio station, just a couple of interviews, and we got a flash mob there, and the 500 chairs vanished in 6 minutes. And it was kind of extraordinary, because people get really greedy, and it's quite ugly, a mob, right? Some people trying to take 2, but they hadn't considered how they'd carry 2, or, so they were trying to, so you see them on the tube kind of struggling with 2 chairs and the rest of it. And then almost immediately, within a day, the chairs were on eBay selling for £200. So the value chain. I was giving away things for free. I was like, okay, I don't want to be a designer selling expensive baubles to rich people anymore. I want to be like, I want to give away my stuff. And then suddenly people were taking advantage of my thing. So imagine if 500 chairs times £200, I could have been okay for that month. But instead, I gave them all away. Yeah. So it was, but it was kind of, exactly the sort of thing that we're talking about, is that it would be very difficult to do that Place de la Concorde in Paris or on Times Square, but London somehow we were able to do this stupid thing, and Paul still remembers it, which is great. Yeah.
It's a brilliant. It is a brilliant city for experimentation like that, and trying things out. That it's one of the things I always loved about your work, and the way actually it's just come to mind now, the fakes project that you've done, where you basically make your own fakes.
Yeah, well, we've been copied from really quite early on. So, I've had maybe 3 or 4 lives as a designer, one making things myself in various studios, in Olympia, in Vauxhall, in Ladbroke Grove, in Notting Hill. So I had that. Then I had 10 years corporate designer working for Habitat, which was owned by IKEA at the time. So obviously IKEA was the biggest furniture, or still is the biggest furniture company in the world, and that was another sort of value proposition, and very much my university was working for the Swedes, right? And then so 20 years ago I started my own label. Hang on, what was your question? I've forgotten already.
It was all about the different projects that you do that use that sort of experimental approach, but it was about the fakes. So one of the first successes, thank you for reminding me, I'm having my Biden moment. That's what they say in my company, right?
a very early, and again, it's a project which wasn't necessarily about design. I'd done a project with the British Council that sent me off to Lagos and off to Jaipur to work with street metal workers, and to try and find new sources of income for the people living on the street doing metal work. And I was very lazy, and actually I was teaching at the Royal College at the time, and instead of going I dropped off 6 students in Lagos, including Max Lamb, whom some of you might know, and 6 students in Jaipur, and they came back with utter rubbish, the majority of them, because it's very hard to work with people like that and find new sources of income. Anyway, so I made this lamp called the Beat Lamp, and it was based on pots, the brass pots that you'll all recognise that carry water from the well. And it was a big success, but it was instantly copied in China. So although we make, and we still make this lamp, and it's still reasonably successful, it's overwhelmed by Asian copies, right? So we looked online, there was 800,000 units available now at a quarter of the price that we can deliver them. So, it's easy to become embittered, and I do know some designers that have become, maybe have one idea and they try and protect it, and then that becomes their whole life. But, for me, it was more like, oh, well, okay, this is interesting. The way they can make it cheap is I make my lamps in brass, hand-beaten, and they make them in aluminium, and they paint them to look like brass. They've got no handwork in them at all. So in the same factory, in India, I can make in aluminium a lamp, which I can bring in at half the price. But I do it in raw aluminium, so it's got an aluminium aesthetic rather than pretending to be brass, and it's given me a whole new warehouse look, actually. So that one looks a bit craft, a bit kind of ethnic. This one looks kind of machine-made and kind of a bit more brutal, and actually I'm preferring the copy of the copy. So it's a kind of authorized fake project where I make a copy of my own copy, which is essentially copied from an Indian water pot in the first place, right?
Brilliant, but also it does speak to the way things are made around the world as well. But coming back to London, and we've spoken a bit about how London informs your work. What about how your work shapes London? So, Paul, you've done a lot of public. So, for example, Please Be Seated. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how your work interacts with the city itself.
Yeah, and this is a good slide because this shows an overview of a lot of the work that we do, and a lot of it is inspired by London, and we learn a lot from London projects. Please Be Seated was one of those. It was a temporary piece, but what was really interesting is whenever you do something in London, like all eyes are on it, and I think that's part of its brand. Because of our education, the galleries, the museums, etc., people look at it for inspiration. So things we start in London are picked up by developers in China or America or India, and it's so interesting when you meet them. They look to us for inspiration in that sense, which is very, very helpful being here. But yeah, I love the conversations that flow from design and creative works that we do here, and it's about that human connection, whether that's coal suspended in the painted hall and conversations of what flow from that, or Please Be Seated, or there's many, many works that start here.
Please Be Seated, really did blur that boundary, and a lot of your work does, between sculpture and street furniture. Did you ever sort of stop and sit nearby and eavesdrop?
Oh yeah, this is my favourite picture actually, this one, because there's, it's easy to say you want to create a work that promotes human interaction, but Please Be Seated, because probably the way it looked, because of its materiality, it sort of left the studio and became its own sort of living social instrument in a way. If you go in the centre, it's like a clock, you can rotate and you can hear different ways people are interacting. And I think the simple sentence, do you mind if I sit here? And then the conversations that flow from that, for me, that's what needs to happen more often. Instead of everyone on their phones getting one opinion crafted for you, conversations that can happen, and design's good for that, right? Whether that's giveaways in Trafalgar Square for what Tom was describing, or these furniture, or please be seated. It's those human connections, conversations can touch upon more serious points, which moves us on and creates closeness.
I'm just conscious of time as well, and I really want to know what you are working on now and next, and what we can look forward to, what you can tell us about that's next. And I know Town Hall project being one, particularly in King's Cross. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, maybe just picking up on your point about design as kind of transformative to a city. I mean, yes, in a small way, and it's happening here in Ladbroke Hall, where you know there's a new cultural centre effectively that's been provided by private money, and the same in King's Cross where I am now, where they've actually, you know, despite it being a property development, they've done a pretty good job of the public-private realm. It's pedestrianised, it's really well planted, people are invited in. And you know, they've used design as a means of improving the city. The project you're talking about is the old Camden Town Hall, which obviously was a civic building, which is abandoned. Not the Camden Town Hall, which is now the Standard Hotel, which has also luckily been repurposed because it's a beautiful brutalist building, but the one next to it, which is more Edwardian 1930s, I think, Town Hall, which was largely abandoned and now is with our friends over here who are converting it into a huge exhibition space on the basement and ground floors, and the top 2 floors are going to be a private members club. So, you know, London lacks, weirdly, a lot of spaces, particularly for exhibition. You know, Olympia, which was an amazing venue, is being redeveloped. Earls Court has been knocked down. So there's not a lot until you get to the O2 or somewhere, or you know, the Excel Centre, right? So it's going to be a new hybrid of exhibition space and members club with a kind of a flow between the two. It's extraordinary because it's still got a working registry office inside that is maintained, so you can still get married or die there, basically, or be born. Birth, deaths, and marriage is what they do in registry offices, and it's got a council chamber which is immaculately restored as well. So that'll be, you know, kind of, you know, the exhibition part will be opening soon, and then the rest of it. But you know, I think what shows up really is the lack of government support for design, because you know, design can be transformational for the city, and you know, I think it's a symbol that the great architecture of the Barbican or the Camden Town Hall or the second Camden Town Hall is no longer happening because it's all in the hands of private-public partnerships that don't give a shit about design. They care about profits, and there's a big danger to the city, you know, alongside housing, for instance, which is not being nurtured. And I think the government's got to step up to the plate and be a bit more long-termist about how they commission and believe in design. We've seen those extraordinary models of Richard Rogers' plans for, you know, Trafalgar Square and the rest of that public realm, and they were just thrown in the bin and ignored, really. So I don't know. I think you know, yeah, we do what we can to move the city on in medium ways, but it'd be good that there was a bit more belief in it from the top. But what was your question
again? Paul, what are you working on now?
I think in my back pocket I've got some sketches that I want to show to Loic about a new collection, so maybe that will be on the boil soon.
Yeah, I've got some sketches for Loic as well.
We can collaborate. We're working on quite an exciting project in Oman. It's in the largest botanical gardens, and it's one of our biggest sort of outdoor pieces, I suppose. It's almost 35 meters long. It's a shade canopy, and it's to do with obviously creating shadow, but it's to do with the sun, and it's quite a peculiar sort of rotating structure that opens up when you need light and closes when you don't. We're trying to get a project off the ground for London Design Festival, which is about AI, which is a fascinating topic that we constantly talk about in the studio, and I'm very sort of this kind of butterfly feeling in my stomach about its potential good and bad. I mean,
yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I was reading in your book, in fact, about how some of your the two things that you're most sort of inspired by, or excited by about the future, being AI on the one side, and then climate change, and the impact of that on the other side, and obviously the two
they're so interlinked, yeah. And I was reading an article, I think 2 weeks ago. Johnny Ives, everyone probably knows that name. He's partnering up with OpenAI, and I think their dream is to sort of replace the iPhone. So that's, for me, if I had to sort of imagine what they're thinking about, it's probably going to be very seductive, beautiful, wearable technology where we will plug in to AI, ChatGPT. And I think that is incredibly exciting. And I've seen a glimpse of what AI can do. I'm not sure if you've tried it, Tom, but things that would take the studio 2 months can be done in 25 seconds. And I think that puts us in quite an awkward position as creative people, because a small amount of people dictating how we will create, I think, potentially needs a bit of examination. I think we need to be more part of that discussion, because
the impact that it has
the
from
impact
a
I
climate
have.
change point of view.
I personally love hearing Tom talk about that chair and where that comes from. I wouldn't be that interested if it was prompted, 3D printed, and shipped from India to Colesdrop Yard. But that's just me.
I want to ask you about AI, but I feel like it's going to be a big discussion on that. Are you doing any projects involving specifically addressing it?
I really kind of understood it 4 years ago when I went to an Alibaba conference in Chengdu in China, which is kind of Alibaba, I think it's Chengdu, anyway, near Shanghai. And I was speaking to not 50 people, it's 10,000 people at the Alibaba conference. Alibaba is the equivalent of everything online in China, and it was billed as a design conference, but from the 2 months from when I was booked to when I appeared, it had become an AI conference, with the speakers there being people from NVIDIA who make the chips, and some real experts in. So I was the only analog person there, but I came back kind of like the evangelist for AI in my company, and literally in the 4 years I have not managed to convince a single person in my own company to bloody use the thing, right? But I use it, I use it all the time, and I'm a real crushing AI bore. And actually, I was on the panel, the other day, and I was arguing with a French Algerian girl who was claiming that British crisps were the best in the world, and I was saying, no, French ones are better. And she said to me, have you ever designed a crisp brand? And I said, yeah, of course. And she was quite talkative, and before she'd finished questioning me, I'd managed to design my own crisp brand and show it to her and say, yeah, I've done crisps before.
Amazing.
So that is equivalently terrifying, because if I can do that, there's no need for me in that equation at all. Because, to be fair, they looked a lot like Pringles, right? So, but the box was pretty fancy, right? And it could have been a commercial proposition. So, I think we're in an existential crisis right now, and we've got to be very, very careful, because mainly because of crime and warfare, and the reality of what's going on, particularly in Ukraine right now. It shows you exactly what's going to happen soon, I'm very worried.
I was one other story. I was in Kansas City last week on a pitching for an art commission, and it was a bit Hunger Gamesy, because they got all of the artists and designers together to meet each other, but we didn't know who was going to win, right? So we was having dinner, and I took a screenshot of everyone who had entered and asked AI what we each would do for this commission, because I copied and pasted the brief, yeah? So I'm there, and everyone's socializing with the commissioner, and I was a bit tipsy, and I was like, I got something to say, and I started to read out what AI said that we would all do. And it got me, it was perfect. It was literally, it described what I was about to present the next day, and everyone around the table, their expressions sort of dropped, and the curators were like, oh, that's amazing, next time we can, and then she stopped saying the last sentence, but I knew what she was thinking. Half joking, but, I agree with Tom, it's we need to sort of participate in this discussion. There is a joy in the human.
It has always been a cliche question to ask about, what would your advice be to the next generation of design students who are looking to make their career, or who look to you. And I feel it is a cliche question, but I feel like the time we're at the moment with AI, with the technology, it's a completely new question as well, because I don't know what I would advise the students of today. And when things can just be created at the drop of a hat, and what would your advice be for the students, design students of today?
Well, okay, it's maybe I use the analogy of photography, right? Where a while back you did photography as a hobby, or you're a professional. But now everybody in the whole world is a photographer, and I sat at dinner with 8 people the other day and asked them how many pictures they had on their phone, and it was 1 million in total, 1 million photographs. So we're all photographers now, right? But does it mean that we appreciate photography more or less than we did before? The jury's out, probably a bit more, actually. Does it mean that there's no photographers working now? Well, yeah, there's loads of photographers working now, even though everybody's a photographer. So I think, the problem with AI is going to be the huge splurge of bad design, and how everything will be kind of slightly similar, because they're using the same engines and the same prompts, and even the AI is telling you how to prompt something now.
True. You see that in writing all the time as well.
And but the problem will be much more all of the white collar and the blue collar jobs are going to vanish with the robots and the AI collectively, and the fact that we're facing a wipeout of employment. So we'll have to find something to do with our time. More sound baths or something.
True.
But the weird thing about all the people in tech is that they're all obsessed with going to Mars, right? And it's like, well, okay, you've got quite a good planet here. Why don't you fix this one first, and then go to Mars? And it perplexes me a lot that all of that AI power, all it's doing is actually increasing the power consumption, not fixing the problem of the power consumption in the first place, right?
I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer. I think what the journey that Joanna and I went through, it was tough because we had to hustle, and that we had to find a passion and energy to try and make it make sense from a business perspective, a creative perspective. And I think that was our challenge. And then what you've just described there, the people graduating are going to have their own set of hurdles. But I think as long as you have that sort of inner belief and fire, that comes from me, from my working class background. My dad, someone says no to him, he just goes straight round them and gets it done. So that energy to kind of really create, the restriction, you have to turn that into a positive. That's a simple answer to that question. But it's a very serious one, I think.
Actually, I was showing my kids your book as well, and they found the £5 note. They were like, "Mummy, can I take this book now?" So you've used these fake £5 notes, didn't you, to apply
Sure.
for the Royal College? I mean, would AI ever come up with that? It just feels like such a human sort of, like a different thing to do that just wouldn't be part of the algorithm.
I'm sure it could come up with it, but I think that in the end, like, if AI or robot can make a great meal, and we're sat here going, "Oh, this is delicious, fantastic," then we find out it's done by a robot, it loses a lot, right? And I think that's the point. If we're looking at a painting, which we're all going, "Oh, that moves me emotionally," it's done by a CNC machine next door, it loses a lot. So things will coexist in that sense. It's never going to replace a lot of the creativity that many people have the urge to create.
Any questions now would be the time.
When was the breakthrough in your career?
doesn't feel like I've actually had that breakthrough, to be honest. I mean, I know that seems strange, but it's not. I mean, that's the thing about London. It keeps you in check. You know, it doesn't release you. It doesn't mean like we're like the poise table downstairs wouldn't fit through my front door, for example. I mean, there's like I create these objects, but not for me. So there's an edge to it. But of course, you know, we've got opportunities now which we didn't have at the beginning. But you know, we were, a couple of years out. The traditional press liked what we were doing, and it gave us a lot of exposure.
It's always thought that London is the place the world shops for design, and I think art to a degree, but really design has always been the limelight. The world all comes here, and it's so great making an Oman. But I was wondering, given Brexit economies, are you sensing fewer shoppers from around the world?
You know, people are shopping here for creative brains that are working in all kinds of other fields as well, right? And that could be dance or tech or combination of it. You know, we're not over yet, okay? And people are shopping for creativity, but I don't think that many people want to study design for making the next sofa or whatever it is, right? So I think the whole recipe is changing, like we've discussed already, is that London kind of is amorphous. It's not a pretty city, it's this huge amorphous blob of possibilities and layers of possibilities, and the creativity shifted towards the digital. So, you know, the people, the great creative brains are possibly not even considering themselves as designers. They might well be engineers, but they're all working at DeepMind in King's Cross, that's for sure. You know, the epicenter of that creativity is right here in London, and we probably won't make the money out of it, exactly like Paul's saying, right? You know, that will be siphoned off to the States, but that was a British company, and they based it here because people want to be here, also because the education's here, and you know, the colleges in Cambridge that are working on that stuff are the places where creatives want to be. So, you know, I think, yeah, sure, we can make beautiful objects and interiors and the rest of it. Maybe in 5 years you won't even want that. You'll be looking at it through your meta glasses in blended reality, rather than wanting an actual object. Maybe you just want a white cube that you can project your beautiful Cocksedge console onto. I mean, I don't know, but literally, you know, the different. But what's also interesting about London is that you always give it up for, say, music. You know, it's like, London just doesn't produce the music anymore, right? And it's actually, London's still number 2 in music in the world. And there's a really exciting scene that you can find here on, is it Friday nights, Loic? But which is this kind of mix of jazz and grime, which is also not happening in West London anymore. It's happening in Peckham, right? And we'd given up music for lost, 5 or 10 years ago. It really wasn't interesting in London, right? It was Ed Sheeran, right? And so now we've got this whole thing, and that'll happen again possibly with product design, interior design, when there's an engineering change. I mean, I got loads of breaks because LEDs changed lighting, right? So. The combination of engineering and science, and like I say, theatre, and look at Wayne McGregor and Abba Voyage. It's happening in London, right? That's design creativity, but just in a different field, a different scope, right? So it's not over, darling.
Thank you, and I think that's a really positive, although by turns terrifying and exciting, but positive note to end on there. I do think we've managed to scratch beneath the surface, perhaps not quite down to Roman ruins, but close, and certainly to the foundations of 2 extraordinary practices shaped by and shaping this amazing city, or how was it you described it, an amorphous blob of possibility, which I love.
Oh, that's like T-shirt, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Bit merch.
Tom and Paul, thank you so much for sharing such generous and thoughtful insights into your work and relationship with London. Thank you to Ladbroke Hall and Carpenters Workshop for hosting us. Thank you all for coming. Please do stick around. Paul will be signing copies of his amazing book. If you haven't already got one, I highly, highly recommend it. Tom will be performing on stage. Absolutely. And thank you.
Very much. Cool. Nice one.